concerned whether or not he can win in November?
I think he can win.
Do you believe he should run for re-election?
I'm not. Am I speaking English to you?
The pressure on Joe Biden to relinquish his hold on the presidency, or at the very least, the nomination for president for re-election, continues to build. Yesterday, we showed you Nancy Pelosi, who was acting like she wants to wait and let Joe Biden make his decision. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's already made his decision. You remember her on Morning Joe getting super testy about the whole thing? Well, the bad mood continued just about an hour after that interview, after we were on the air yesterday. She was walking through the halls of Congress, and a reporter was asking basic questions about Joe Biden's abilities, like, do you think he's the best candidate? Do you think he can win? And strangely, instead of Nancy Pelosi saying, of course, he's our president, he's done a great job, he's got the nomination, and we're behind him for re-election. Instead of saying that, she did this.
Convey to President Biden what you said this morning.
I'm not having any conversations with you or anybody else about what I talked to the president about. We don't do this over.
Do you believe that?
I never do. I never do. So it's nothing new.
I understand, Madam Speaker. Do you believe that him waiting so long to make this
I'm not
decision?
going to make any comments in the hallway about the fate of our nation. Okay?
Are you concerned whether or not he can win in November?
I think he can win.
Do you believe he should run for re-election?
I'm not. Am I speaking English to you? I'm not going to be making any statements about any of that right now in the hallway.
Wow. That's Rachel Scott of ABC News, by the way. And again, it could have been so simple. Well, that's a ridiculous question. He's our nominee. He's our president. He's got a great track record. We're all on board with his reelection. Instead, I'm not going to have a conversation here in the hallway about the fate of our nation. Wow. And she got a little testy there, didn't she? Am I not speaking English to you? You know, I'm thinking that if this were a Republican congressman or congresswoman suggesting that a minority woman who is a reporter can't understand English, I'm thinking that would probably get some pushback. Maybe charges of, discrimination or racism or bigotry. Nancy Pelosi gets away with it, though. But more importantly, look how testy they are when they're challenged on this question. And they're angry that reporters aren't just, stepping down and doing what they always do for them. Maybe it's because these reporters, frankly, they want to see Joe Biden go. They know he's going to lose. And so they're doing whatever they can to change the narrative here. That's why when a congresswoman like Debbie Dingell shows up on CNN, she's challenged as well.
I do just want to ask you again if you think President Biden is the strongest person at the top of the ticket to win Michigan in the fall.
He's the candidate right now. And these are, do you beat your wife kind of questions. Who is the strong? Everybody said Hillary Clinton's the strongest candidate. She's going to win. And I told you all in 2015, 2016, Donald Trump was going to win. I loved Hillary, but she wasn't the strongest candidate. What we got to do is go out and talk the issues. And we got to make sure we talk about what Joe Biden's accomplished, what the vision is, what Democrats stand for,
Wow, that did not go well at all. And it was incredibly telling. Also, Debbie Dingell, not the brightest bulb on the tree. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Not the, I've got one more of those. I'll come up with it later. Let's break this down, shall we? I love a little 30-second bit like this.
I do just want to ask you again if you think President Biden is the strongest person at the top of the ticket to win.
I also want to point out that Debbie Dingell seems to be cosplaying as Jill Biden. Isn't it weird how she dresses like the first lady and even talks like the first lady? The little girl voice. By the way, she has something in common with Jill Biden. She married a much older man who was a politician, the departed, rest in peace, Congressman Dingell from Michigan. This is a family seat in the House of Representatives. She inherited it from her husband. They've held on to it for like 80 years. Seriously. the Dingles of Michigan. So the question is, do you think he's the best candidate? Which I think is hilarious because they weren't asking this before the primaries began. There's this narrative out there that the liberal media were wrong about Joe Biden and his mental capabilities, and conservative media was right. And that's why you should watch conservative media. Listen, I think you should watch conservative media, and it is because we're right about a lot of things, and liberal media is wrong about a lot of things. But in this case, the fact of the matter is, the liberal media was not wrong about Joe Biden's mental capabilities, and conservative media wasn't right about Joe Biden's mental capabilities. I don't know. The liberal media knew full well what Joe Biden's mental capabilities were or weren't. They knew. They saw the same thing we saw. They're not stupid. They're liars. They weren't wrong. They knew. They participated in a cover-up. And it's not just during his presidency. The cover-up began when he started running for president. In fact, if you go back and look at how Joe Biden was reported on in 2019, during the primary process, there were plenty of stories. There were plenty of stories about Hunter Biden, by the way. I believe it was Vanity Fair that did a huge article about Hunter Biden and how Hunter Biden could harm his father's chances of winning the election. This was during the primary, when Joe Biden was a viable target because, they wanted Elizabeth Warren, or they wanted Bernie Sanders, or they wanted Pete Buttigieg, which still makes me laugh that anyone thinks that he could be president. It wasn't until he became the nominee that suddenly they all had to think, well, he's the greatest person ever, most qualified man in the history of mankind. Hunter Biden, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. That's Russian disinformation. And of course, Joe Biden, he just has a stutter. See, they're not stupid. They're not. And they weren't wrong. No, it's much worse than that. They know full well. They're liars. But now they're deciding to start asking questions again, probably for the same reason that they stopped asking questions in 2020, because the most important thing was to beat Donald Trump. And now they see that if Joe Biden is the candidate, Donald Trump wins, probably pretty handily, and they can't have that. And so now the election interference begins. Now the election interference, trying to remove Joe Biden against the will of the Democratic Party, the voters in the primaries, it begins in earnest. So the question is he the best candidate? Debbie Dingle.
In Michigan in the fall.
He's the candidate right now. And
He's the candidate right now. What does that mean? And he'll be our candidate in November. No, he's the candidate right now. Don't worry, we've got a plan.
Do you beat your wife kind of questions? Who is?
She's stupid. It's not do you beat your wife kind of questions. The colloquialism that she is searching for is do you still beat your wife kind of questions. This is a thing that, by the way, we probably shouldn't even use anymore because it's just gross to conjure the image of somebody beating their wife, especially for a woman to say it. It's just unseemly and makes me uncomfortable. But just to educate you and educate her about how moronic that sounds, the idea of a do you still beat your wife kind of question is a lose-lose. Because if you no matter how you answer it, you're admitting to the fact that you have beaten your wife. So it's not do you beat your wife kind of question, because ironically, Debbie Dingle, it's actually a very pure question. Is he the best candidate? Either say yes or no. Do you beat your wife? Yes or no? Do you still beat your wife? That's a problem. You can't answer it, because if you say no, you're conceding that you used to beat your wife. If you say yes, well, obviously that's problematic as well. But no, Debbie Dingle, it's not one of those kind of questions. It's a very simple, straightforward question. Kind of like, do you beat your wife? If you don't, you say no. So is Joe Biden the best candidate? Yes or no? I can't answer that. Okay. Seems like you could. Let's move on from Dingle. This one may be my favorite. This is Tim Kaine, senator in Virginia. You'll remember him. He was Hillary Clinton's running mate. He's now facing off in Virginia, which at the moment now is considered a battleground state, Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who won for the first time since 2009. No Republican had won statewide since then. He's considered a potential running mate for Donald Trump. And now this guy is running against a Republican, a very attractive candidate named Hung Cao, a first-generation refugee from Vietnam who is pushing hard against Tim Kaine and his party's open border immigration policies. Hung Cao also graduated the Naval Academy and a retired captain in the Navy. This is Tim Kaine's toughest race yet for re-election, which explains why he's suddenly pretty lukewarm on his pal Joe Biden continuing on the ticket. Watch his answer.
I have complete confidence that Joe Biden will do the patriotic thing for the country, and he's going to make that decision. He's never disappointed me. He's always put patriotism and the country ahead of himself, and I'm going to respect the decision he makes.
Wow. Why are they acting like Joe Biden hasn't made his decision? I'm sure that President Biden will make the patriotic decision. Every single day since the debate 2 weeks ago, he has appeared either at a rally or on television in an interview with George Stephanopoulos, with Joe and Mika, and he has said the same thing. I'm not going anywhere. I can beat Donald Trump. I'm the nominee. And here's Tim Kaine saying, I'm sure he'll make the patriotic decision. And Joe's like, I've made the patriotic decision. It's me. I'm your guy. Okay, Joe. Just, you might want to think on it a little more. By the way, why doesn't Tim Kaine just come out and freaking say Joe Biden should not be the nominee? He should get off the ticket. It's going to kill us. Because that is what he's saying. He just won't say it. And this is why people hate politicians. Listen to how he puts this again.
I have complete confidence that Joe Biden will do the patriotic thing for the country, and he's going to make that decision. He's never disappointed me. He's always put patriotism and the country ahead of himself, and I'm going to respect the decision.
He's always put patriotism and what's best for the country ahead of himself. Now, I want you to just think about this logically for a moment. In fact, I want you to be so logical and so smart that you wear your glasses on your forehead to think through this for a moment, all right? Because that's how serious this is. I take this very seriously, and that's why this is the look I'm going for. Joe Biden, after his debate performance 2 weeks ago, is now getting calls from all across his party and across the media to step down from the ticket. Tim Kaine, when asked about what Joe Biden's going to do, says he's always put patriotism and his country before his own interests. Now, if Joe Biden decides to stay on the ticket in this climate, with all these questions being asked, is that putting his country and patriotism before his own interests? I don't think it is. In fact, if you really put your glasses on your forehead and think this through for a minute, you'll reach the conclusion that Tim Kaine thinks that what's best for the country, instead of Joe Biden's own personal interests, would be for Joe Biden to step down, right? In fact, now that I think about it, you don't even have to put your glasses on your forehead to think that one through. It's pretty clear what Tim Kaine is saying here. Joe Biden has lost the support of Tim Kaine based on that statement right there. It's obvious. And by the way, Tim Kaine is in the fight for his life against Hung Cao in Virginia. That's obvious too. And Virginia is really in play for the presidential election. All of those things are clear from those 15 seconds of obfuscation and deflection from Tim Kaine. And see what happens when you try not to say something? You actually end up saying a whole lot more. Oh, and speaking of Morning Joe, I feel like we're seeing Dr. Kubler-Ross's acceptance of death protocols before our very eyes, right? Anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The anger was palpable at the beginning with Joe and Mika. In fact, they were even angry at each other after the debate. The bargaining has been going on with Kamala Harris and themselves, for that matter. Anger, depression. Oh, the depression. Well, look at them. Look at Mika's face. There's definitely depression going on. Anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The George Clooney op-ed that we talked about yesterday, and I think I may have mentioned it, this doesn't happen without Barack Obama's approval, right? Here's Joe Scarborough telling the world what he has found out from his insiders in D.C. about exactly what Barack Obama is doing, given the current circumstances.
Is the Biden campaign and many Democratic officials do believe that Barack Obama is quietly working behind the scenes to orchestrate this. And if Joe Biden believes that, that's not going to get him out of the race any faster. Anytime David Axelrod attacks him, David Axelrod ensures that Joe Biden will dig himself in another day.
I mean, that's basically what Obama's
anytime the pod bros say something nasty about Joe Biden, which they have repeatedly said nasty things about Joe Biden before the debate, after the debate. Every time they do that, he digs in a little bit further. The pathway to Joe Biden graciously stepping aside does not go through the Obamas or the Clintons. It just doesn't. Again, as I said, because some people don't understand, I'm not talking about what ought to be. I'm talking about what is.
By the way, that little line there, because some people don't seem to understand, he's talking about his wife. He's talking about his wife. He's saying, listen, this is what it is. I'm not saying this is how it ought to be, because remember, they've been fighting about this whole thing. Look at it. Look at her face. Look at her face. It's just so uncomfortable to see a husband throwing shade at his own wife on camera. I got to blow it. You got to look at her face. Let's blow it up. Look at her. Oh, man. Who wants to deal with that after the show? Oh, Lord, Joe, I'm saying a prayer for you. Not really. Yeah, this is about Obama. And by the way, I love the fact that Scarborough here is sort of revealing what everyone in D.C. knows, which is Team Biden, Team Obama, Team Clinton. They all hate each other. I got to say, I admire the fact that they put on a happy face and try to work together and actually pretend like they like each other for the good of their party and their good of staying in power. See, this is a big difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are so hungry for power, and they love power so much, and they are so loath to relinquish power that they're willing to swallow their pride and pretend like they all like each other. Nancy Pelosi hates AOC. Absolutely hates her. But she did what she had to do to stay in power, you see. Contrast that with the Republicans. You know, from Kevin McCarthy to Matt Gaetz to MTG if they hate each other, you know it. They let you know, even if it means they lose, because they're a little bit more genuine, I guess. But yeah, they do. And but the idea that Obama is behind all of this is so obvious. It's so obvious that he is working. And I think it was the way I'm going to go back. You really want to, put on your tinfoil hat with me for a moment. That video of Obama leading Joe off the stage at the fundraiser. Obama did not have to do that the way he did that so publicly and so obviously. He did not have to grab him by the hand in such an emasculating way, in an infantile way. He didn't have to put his hand on his shoulder as he led him off the stage, like he was basically saying, all right, Joe, your time has come. It's over now. Let's move on, shall we? That didn't have to happen. Also, one wonders how many people in Biden's inner circle of political advisors who suggested, yeah, that early debate's a great idea, is actually in the back chain to Obama. Anita Dunn is one of the chief advisors in this White House, and Anita Dunn was one of the chief communications advisors in the Obama White House. And you'll remember the leaks immediately after that debate from Hunter and First Lady Jill, they were blaming the staff. they were blaming people like Anita Dunn. One other thing about Barack Obama. You know where he lives, right? I know he's got a house at Martha's Vineyard, and he's got a house in Chicago, and he's got a house in Hawaii, and, what a man of the people, right, with all of those houses. But you know where he lives? He lives in Washington, D.C. He lives in a very, very ritzy neighborhood, the Kalorama neighborhood, right down the street from the mosque, by the way, which is fascinating. And up the street from Embassy Row, and about 3.5 miles from the White House. It's very rare. In fact, I think it was it Woodrow Wilson was the last former president to actually live in Washington, D.C. post-presidency. I mean, it's been almost 100 years since a president post-presidency has decided to stay in Washington, D.C. And when they bought their home in Kalorama, it was challenged. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you staying in Washington? Former presidents always leave town. There's a reason why former presidents always leave town, because to have a former president sort of lurking and there is detrimental to the functioning of the new president, number one. And number two, if you're really a good president, you kind of hate Washington. The sooner you can get out of there, the better. Now, Barack Obama said at the time that he was staying here because his daughter was finishing high school and they didn't want to pull her out of high school. So they're going to stay here until she graduates. Yeah, that was 8 years ago. She's gone. She's been gone. They still live in Washington, D.C. And those former Obama staffers who work at the White House or the State Department or the Pentagon, they're constantly at Obama's house. Obama's all over this process right now. And one of the additional backroom negotiations that is going on has to do with Kamala Harris and how much influence she will allow the Obama people to have in her administration. It was a no-brainer for Biden. I mean, literally no-brainer, because, he has no functioning brain. But Kamala is a different story. And I assure you right now, Obama is trading his influence and his ability to push Biden aside, and Obama can do that, by the way. He's trading that with Kamala in exchange for his continued participation and influence in the federal government. All right, you can take the tinfoil hat off now. Scott Jennings over on CNN continues to hit for the cycle. He addressed this issue about Joe Biden and whether he stays or goes.
His issue is not a one-off cognitive test. His issue is that he's super old. He is an obvious decline from when he ran in 2020 and from when he served as vice president. And no test is going to reverse what we've seen. The reason he's having so much trouble with all this is because he spent his entire career getting used to his own largely fabricated personal narrative being successfully covered up. This is disorienting for him. This is the first time in his life that his personal narrative is not being covered up, either by Democrats or by media looking the other way. This is the first time we've seen on full display the truth of Joe Biden. They have covered this up for so long, and it's a scandal.
It is a scandal. This entire story, as I've been saying all week, is the media cover-up, the government cover-up, the White House cover-up. Chuck Todd, I think yesterday in a podcast said, what we're seeing from Joe Biden right now diminishes his entire legacy. This is a different Joe Biden than we've seen before. And I don't know, this is not the public servant who always puts the country back. Are you kidding me? Have you not been watching this, man? This is Joe Biden. Everything you're seeing from Joe Biden right now is consistent with his legacy. From his mistreatment of Clarence Thomas, to his deceitful demolition of Robert Bork, to the fact that he was sworn into the Senate in the hospital room where his wife was I don't know, maybe it's me, maybe I'm old-fashioned. But your wife and daughter die, and you've got young children, and you get sworn in as a senator instead of saying, you know what, I've got bigger important things to do right now in my life than hobnob with Teddy Kennedy in Washington. I'm going to raise my children. I'm going to be a dad. They need me right now. He has always put his own narcissism and ego in front of everything that he's done. The fact that he has stayed in Washington for over 50 years and pretends like he's the only one who can give the working man a fair shot. Give me a break. All right, real fast. As you just mentioned, as you just saw Scott Jennings on CNN say, this is a scandal. This is a scandal. Well, I don't know. If you check over on MSNBC right now, I don't know. Maybe it's me. But if you're trying to convey to your audience that what's going on isn't a scandal, maybe having a giant banner with capital letters screaming, "This is not a scandal," might undermine that message. Don't look here. Everything, there's nothing to see. It's not a scandal or anything. No.
Clooney's observations are not unique. Joe Biden is a decent man who, like I said, has done nothing wrong. He hasn't been caught in a scandal. He is just aging. And that reality makes him, I think, increasingly likely to lose re-election to a Republican candidate who, again, is just a few years younger, we're going to be in the same boat a few years from now. We elect him.
No, we aren't. Because Donald Trump is 2 years younger than Joe Biden. Go back 2 years ago and think about what Joe Biden was doing. This is not aging. It is a scandal. It's a scandal because the White House has covered it up, and people like Chris Hayes are covering up. He continues to lie. This isn't about Joe Biden aging, and you know it, and I know it, and Chris Hayes knows it. By screaming, "This is not a scandal," Chris Hayes is, in fact, participating in the scandal. This is not about Joe Biden aging. It's not about Donald Trump being just a couple of years younger than him. There's no way that Donald Trump is going to be in the same situation. Donald Trump has not had 2 brain surgeries in his lifetime. He does not have some sort of neurological disorder. There's no indication of it, at least. And this is not about the aging process. Bernie Sanders is older than Joe Biden, for God's sake. So as they scream, "This is not a scandal," rest assured, this is in fact a scandal, and they continue to lie about it, and they will continue to lie about it right up until they can't lie anymore. Most of them got exposed with their lies 2 weeks ago at the debate. Some of them, the bitter clingers, they're hanging on for dear life by the fingernails, and soon it's all going to come gloriously tumbling down.